Hey everyone, welcome. It's Naomi Wolf of Daily Clout, and I'm really excited to once again have the incredible commentator who's been with us in the past, Charlotte Walker. Welcome, Charlotte Walker.
Naomi, thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me yet again.
It's such a pleasure. And what I wanted to remind everyone is that Charlotte Walker has been an advisor to many tech companies, an investor in tech companies. She's an advisor to Daily Clout, and she's on the steering committee of Women Owned Greenwich, which is a mentoring organization in Greenwich, Connecticut for women who own their own businesses. And you recently had a panel called Pivot with Purpose at the Greenwich Public Library. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Co-sponsored with the Greenwich Public Library. Yeah.
Fantastic. And with Women Owned Greenwich. So it's so wonderful to have you. And I'm just going to jump right in. Charlotte, in her last couple of interviews with us, has incredibly powerfully explained to us what the CARES Act is. And she was the first, I would say, commentator, I hadn't seen it before Charlotte's interview, to have revealed how much the CARES Act, the last version of it, which was so initially hyped as being good for small businesses, was in fact really crushingly terrible for small businesses and full of other forms of unfairness. And many other news organizations, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, subsequently ran stories that I would really say Charlotte broke. And so today I'm going to ask Charlotte to go ahead and update us what is new and what is the HEROES Act. So please jump right on in.
Okay, so what's new since our last article and interview, which was around the end of April, April 20th, I think was the last article, is that the SBA, excuse me, has approved, over 4.7 million loans, roughly $515 billion for the payroll protection program and the emergency EIDL program. The EIDL has run out of money, and it's likely that the HEROES Act will include some more funding for that. But pretty much this has been helpful to a lot of small businesses, but it did come, as I suspected it would, too late for the vast majority of small businesses. So we already know from our own local experience that 20% of some small businesses have shut down permanently. So that's a very, very big hit. And I would just say that the other things that we were concerned about, that the loan configurations were tough for a lot of small businesses to take on. They just didn't make sense for them. The lenders who normally loan to small businesses like PayPal and Square and some others were late getting in on the game, so that didn't help the particularly small businesses. Whenever government is trying to do some big program like this, there's always going to be fallout, but too little, too late.
Right. I know you're right from personal experience. I tried to apply for a small business loan through Stripe and didn't even get a response. I don't know, when you say it's run out of money, I don't know anyone. I know many people whose small businesses have suffered, people who know people whose small businesses have closed. I really don't know anyone who got a small business loan in time. Do you?
I do, but they are largely larger organizations, and as we know, there's been a lot of reporting on the abuse of the system as well. Actually, large public companies being able to tap into the PPP loans and that sort of thing at the detriment of other lenders. I think the banks did what they normally did. Those customers that have good relationships got to the head of the queue. And so if you were did not have a banking relationship with someone who was participating in a bank that was participating in that program, you were sort of up a creek without a paddle.
So unfair. So tell us more about the HEROES Act. Are you a fan of it? Do you think there are things that could be done better?
Well, the HEROES Act is another massive attempt at rectifying some wrongs in the and or inadequacies in the prior acts. The HEROES Act has been passed by the House.
Okay.
It is largely dead on arrival at the Senate. And it has a number of very good things in it. But I would have to say that one of the things that I should mention that, before we really get into the HEROES Act, is that there has been extension of the Main Street lending program from the Federal Reserve that now ups the size of the corporation that can participate in it up to 15,000 employees and $5 billion. It was 10,000 employees and 2.5. And as you and I commented in the past, this is not Main Street.
No, it's not.
These are large large corporations in the scheme of things. When you think of small business being up to 500 employees, 90% of them under, 50 and under. So getting to the CARES Act, I think that what it does is add some funding for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program through the SBA, which is a good thing. That's what I mentioned had run out of money. It provides some funding for the states and for cities and municipalities, local governments, for tribal communities. There's allocation for Washington, D.C., who a lot of people think should become a state.
Excuse me one second. What does it give states the funding to do? Also to make loans to small businesses?
No, not necessarily. It's really to shore up, the deficits that the states and municipalities have, because the burden has been on them. For both providing assistance, unemployment, all that sort of thing, and providing some, further assistance to hospitals and all, the various other expenses that they've experienced through this. They've lost revenue.
So it's money from the federal government to states and tribal entities to help them with the cost they've already expended dealing with the pandemic.
Correct.
Right? And the consequences of the pandemic, medical, but also social welfare, emergency relief, things like that.
Exactly.
Correct? That's really important to know. Go ahead.
Yes, exactly. There is money in the HEROES Act for additional stimulus, another $1,200 stimulus check, $2,400 to joint filers, $1,200 per dependent with a cap on 3 dependents. There's funds for testing and coronavirus tracing. As you know, we're lagging far behind as a country in testing, so that seems to me a high priority. There's extension of expanded unemployment insurance through January 31st with a soft cutoff to ensure some could get through March 2021. And it allocates nearly $1 billion to states to assist with processing claims, which were crushed during this whole process. So there's money for elections and vote by mail, the U.S. Postal Service, $25 billion there, and also COBRA subsidies, which is really interesting. There are some progressive Democrats who have criticized this provision in the bill because they say it's just giving money to insurance companies. But if you can, if you're independent and trying to get health care, it's much more expensive than if you're off of a corporate program. So it would be beneficial to have something like that. It also repeals the tax cuts that we had mentioned earlier in earlier programming, that gives corporations and the wealthy, billions of dollars in tax credits over the next 10 years. And it caps state and local tax deductions to $10,000. So there is an attempt.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to ask questions that I know our audience might be asking. When you mentioned that provision, that it repeals tax cuts to corporations, a layperson might ask, how does that help with this current pandemic? I mean, whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea, it definitely sounds like a Democratic partisan idea to not, let rich people get away with murder. But how does it actually relate to, like, people often say bad legislation packs in all kinds of unrelated stuff, especially to throw red meat to one's base. I don't get whether I think it's a good idea or not to have tax cuts for corporations. I don't get how it helps people who are thrown out of work by the pandemic, states who are desperately trying to feed people. What do you think is the connection there?
Well, I maybe answer it in a longer way than you want to hear, but I think it was a corporate giveaway. There was really no reason to make those tax cuts.
Gotcha.
And I think it's an attempt on the part of the Democratic House to take back something that probably shouldn't have happened in the first place.
So they see it as correcting something that got larded into the last bill that also didn't.
Right. Yeah, and I think the reality is when, from 2008 to now, with the last major stimulus that there was in the last, recession, and now what there has been with the type of stimulus programs is a vast transfer of wealth to the wealthy, and a flattening of, if not declining, wealth to everybody else.
Right.
And so this is sort of a first stab at, I think, taking that back.
Understood.
And that's a long discussion, as you know.
Thanks for explaining. So please go on and tell us more
Yeah.
about what's in it.
So those are really the big items. The Democrats are also proposing a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill.
Huh.
And there's some really meaty things in that, 300 billion to build and fix roads and bridges. As a nation, we are years and years behind in terms of our infrastructure and built environment renovation. $100 billion in transit options. I don't know exactly what that entails, but it sounds interesting. There's 100 billion for housing, 100 billion for broadband,
Wow.
25 billion for clean drinking water, 25 billion for the U.S. Postal Service, that kind of stuff. I understand that Mitch McConnell wants to restrict the bill to $1 trillion.
Total.
Yes, in total, which would be a big cut. But there does appear to be support for 2.2 trillion. So I think that many Republicans can get behind a lot of these ideas.
It's really interesting.
So the administration is telegraphing that they want a travel credit and they want support for oil and gas companies and manufacturing. I don't see a justification for the support for oil and gas companies, maybe for manufacturing. But I do have a whole list of things that I think should happen or could happen. And what I really consider the must-haves are, the infrastructure type projects, the build and fix roads and bridges. And I should stipulate in there that, the provisions that are currently being articulated are suggesting that everything has to be done with resilience in mind, with sustainable materials and all that sort of thing, which is starting to get us back on the path of a greener economy than we've had before, and that would be a good thing. So those must-haves, the transit options, the build and fix roads, the housing, the broadband, the clean water, for God's sakes, you wouldn't believe that, we're the #1 nation in the world and we still don't have 100% clean water. Those are really the must-haves. And I think you also, for rural communities and you have to have the United States Postal Service. So not funding that would not be a good thing for us. So that's that. And I think, when, other things that we really need to start thinking about, because we haven't had just one crisis here. It hasn't been just COVID.
Right.
What this has done is bring to the fore, it very, very graphically, via protests and other things, so many things. The inequity, the income gap between the wealthy and everybody else, the inequities in the healthcare system, education system, financial systems for minorities, and the structural failures in the healthcare system, as well as many other things. So I think from my perspective, we had existential crises in so many different places, and we really have an opportunity as a nation at this stage to really try and do something about that. So I would really like to see an emphasis on the healthcare system, education, student loans, cost of education, and the environment. I'd like to see us appear on the world stage in a leadership position there. We're so falling behind here. I think that would be good. You could have incentives for large corporations to be good citizens.
Are you talking about in this set of two bills or generally
Yes.
their legislation? So
Yeah,
adding in those elements or strengthening them in these two bills.
correct. And you could have, I think, as I've talked about before, the focus on shareholder value at the exclusion of employees, suppliers, communities that your business is in, and all that sort of thing over the last 30 years has really been very, very detrimental. And you can point to so many things, that really point back to that as a problem. So you can incentivize large corporations to be good citizens, public-private partnerships, minimum wage, requirements for healthcare, education, training, and all that sort of thing. And I think there have to be efforts to modernize the Small Business Administration and bring it to a more elevated stature.
Right, you mentioned that in our last interview. So is that kind of the end of your wish list for ways to strengthen these bills? And are there any final thoughts you have about what's ahead?
Well, what's ahead, I am sure there's going to be a lot of partisan bickering, which also is frankly not helping us at all. And I don't know what we'll end up with, and we're not going to find out until after the July recess. I don't think. We may get some hints here and there. I do think that on my wish list is also that there is an effort to reevaluate our national laboratories and their mission and purpose. When we had Second World War, and threats of foreign nations with technology that was superior to ours, and on and on and on, the national laboratories formed. And we have as much or worse going on now with respect to structural problems in our markets, environment, and economy, which require a national attention and a strategic plan. So I would hope that somebody would start thinking about that and start thinking about how to restructure the mission of the national laboratories and to have it benefit all of the country.
Well, that is a fantastic subject for a future interview because, now, what better time than now when we need objective science and objective medicine more than ever, if I'm understanding correctly what the national
Correct.
do. Well, it's a fantastic overview. We could talk for hours about these things, but we're going to wrap it up. Sadly, I hate to ever lose you because your exposition is so brilliantly effective. But just to recap, we've heard about two bills. There are trillions of dollars involved with both of them. One of them addresses small businesses and fills in gaps left by the previous CARES Act. And it also helps states and tribal entities deal with the fallout of the pandemic. And the other one, really fascinating, And I'm sure you would say get on the phone or get on email to your elected officials, make your voice heard, use BillCam to take a look at these bills. We'll embed them in this video. Also directs trillions of dollars toward infrastructure and toward presumably creating a lot of new jobs by pumping either 1 trillion or up to 2.2 trillion in new projects. And the parameters of that are not complete, but it's a kind of using the federal government to infuse cash into a badly damaged economy. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this has been fantastically useful. Once again, Charlotte Walker, we can't thank you enough. You've educated everybody. I can't wait to get this out everywhere. Thank you so much for your even-handed, deep, thoughtful explanation of these super complicated bills, making them so clear and simple. And we can't wait to talk to you next time.
All right. Thank you very much, Naomi.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.